Welcome back to Inside the Philippines. I'm glad you're here. Most of the stories we tell on this channel are cautionary tales. A man arrives with hope and a decent amount of savings, and he leaves with neither. That's the pattern. You know it by now if you've been watching for any length of time. This one is different. Not because nothing went wrong. Things went wrong. Not because there was no money spent, no hard moments, no point where this man stood at a crossroads and had to make a choice he wasn't prepared for. There were all of those things. It's different because of who this man is and what he did with the crossroads when he reached it. His name is Brendan. He's 65 years old. He's from Castlecomer in County Kilkenny, Ireland, a small town, a mining town, the kind of place where men measure their lives in shifts rather than years. He spent 32 years as a coal miner. His hands show it. His knees show it. He retired with a pension, some savings, and a house that didn't feel like a home anymore. He came to the Philippines not because of a dating app, not because of a YouTube channel, not because anyone promised him anything. He came because a friend told him to get off his sofa. What happened between that phone call and now? That's the story. And it's going to make you think, whether you're planning a trip to the Philippines, already living here, or just trying to understand what these stories are really about, underneath all the drama. Here's Brendan. In his own words. Right. So, Castlecomer. If you don't know it, it's in County Kilkenny, about 20 minutes from the town. It used to be a colliery village. The Wandesfords ran the mines for about 200 years, and then the coal ran out, and the jobs went with it. And now it's a heritage trail and a craft center and a lovely spot for a Sunday drive. Which is fine, that's fine. But when I was a young man, it was a working place, and that meant something. I started underground at 19. My father had done it, his father before him. You didn't question it much. You put on the lamp and you went down and you did your 8 hours and you came back up, and that was the shape of a day. 32 years of that shape. You miss it when it's gone, which I know sounds peculiar, but there's a particular kind of certainty about knowing exactly what the day holds. No surprises underground. Or, if there are surprises, they're the kind that wake you up properly. The knees went first. Then the chest started. Nothing severe, the doctor said. Mild coal dust damage, manageable. I took the medical retirement at 57 and thought that would be the hardest adjustment I'd ever make. It wasn't. Maread. We'd been married 38 years. I met her at a dance in Kilkenny City when I was 22, and she was 20. And that was that, more or less. She was brighter than me. Everyone knew it, including her. She handled the money, the children's school arrangements, the social calendar we had, the Christmas cards. I earned and she organized, and between the two of us, a life got built. A good life. I don't want to make it sound like I was useless. I wasn't useless. But there were entire systems running in that house that I had no idea about until they stopped. She was diagnosed in 2020. Ovarian cancer, stage 3. They caught it when they caught it, which wasn't as early as any of us would have liked. I'm not going to go through the details of it. That's not what this is. What I'll say is that for the last 18 months of her life, I was her full-time carer. And I learned more about what love actually looks like in that time than in all the 36 years before it. It's not the romantic version. It's the driving to Waterford for chemo, the learning to cook because she couldn't stand at the stove anymore, the sleeping in the chair beside the hospital bed because the chair was closer than home, and home was too far. She died in March of 2022. I didn't cry at the funeral. I don't know why that was. I've thought about it a lot, and I still don't know. I cried plenty later, alone, in the kitchen, at odd times, over strange things. The first time I couldn't find the good bread knife and realized she'd always known where it was. Things like that. The house stayed exactly as she left it for almost a year. I didn't move her plants. I didn't touch her side of the wardrobe. The good china sat in the cabinet in the front room, the set we'd gotten as a wedding present from her aunt and used maybe 4 times in 38 years. And I'd sit at the kitchen table in the mornings with my tea and look at it through the open door and think, I don't know what I thought. Nothing useful. My daughter, Sinead, rang every Sunday. My son, Dara, was in Boston and rang less, which I understood. Time difference, young children, busy. But I understood it, and was still a bit lonely about it, if that makes sense. The neighbors brought food for a while and then stopped, which is normal and right. You can't expect people to keep coming forever. The priest said all the correct things. The union lads took me for a pint. And then it was just the ordinary length of the days. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. I didn't go to the Philippines to find a woman. I want to be very clear about that, because I know what this channel is and I know what you're expecting, and I think it's important that you understand I had no plan whatsoever. I wasn't on Filipino Cupid. I wasn't watching videos about cheap retirement in Southeast Asia. I was a 64-year-old man in County Kilkenny with bad knees and a savings account I'd never looked at. Mairead had handled all of that, and the main thing I was trying to figure out was how to fill a Tuesday. Mick Doherty was to blame, if blame is the right word. Mick was from Tipperary, an old union man, retired electrician. We'd known each other 20 years through the Trades Council. 3 years before any of this, he'd packed up and moved to Cebu City in the Philippines. Just went. His kids were grown, he'd sold his house in Thurleys, and off he went. He'd been sending me photos ever since. Sunsets over the water, plates of food I didn't recognize, that big grinning head of his outside various establishments. I'd found it mildly irritating, to be honest. Seemed like showing off. After Mairead died, he kept sending them. I think he knew I needed something to look at that wasn't the inside of my own house. One Sunday after Mass, a Sunday in October, the mornings were getting dark early, I rang him instead of going home. I don't know what made me do it. He picked up on the second ring, which meant it was about 7 in the evening his time, and he was clearly in a bar somewhere because I could hear the noise of it. And I said something like, I'm thinking I need to go somewhere, and he said, come here so. Come for a month, he said. You'll either love it or you'll hate it and go home. Either way, you'll have gotten off that sofa. 2 months later, I was on a flight to Cebu with a suitcase and no plan and a small notebook in my jacket pocket that I'd started keeping after the doctor told me I needed to track my blood pressure. I ended up using it for rather more than that. Cebu Airport smells like air conditioning and fried garlic. That was the first thing I noticed. Then the heat when the doors opened. Not the damp cold of a Kilkenny December, but something physical. Something that leans on you. I stood outside with my case and my jacket over my arm, thinking, well, this is somewhere else entirely. Mick was late. 40 minutes late, standing at the curb in a short-sleeved shirt and sandals, looking obscenely comfortable for a man from Tipperary. He shook my hand, took my bag without asking, threw it in the back of a grab he'd arranged, and said, "You look terrible. Good. That means you needed to come." That was the welcome. I didn't mind it. He'd sorted me a room in a guest house near his apartment in La Hug. Nothing fancy, a clean bed and a ceiling fan and a small balcony where you could sit in the evenings and listen to the neighborhood. And the neighborhood had a lot to say for itself. Karaoke from somewhere to the left, starting around 9, and going until whenever the singer got tired or ran out of San Miguel. Roosters from somewhere to the right, starting at 4 in the morning and operating on no discernible schedule. Church bells at 6. It was loud in a way Castlecomer is not loud, and I lay in that first night listening to it all and thought, at least I won't be lying awake in the quiet. The first week, Mick ran me around like a tour guide who doesn't believe in tourism. Not the resorts, not the beaches yet, just the city, the real shape of it. We walked the carbon market on a Tuesday morning, which is not an experience for the faint-hearted. Fish and vegetables and everything else crammed into a space that shouldn't fit at all. Everybody moving around you. The smell of the sea and something else underneath that you decide not to identify. We had breakfast at a carinderia on a side street off Osmeña Boulevard. Sinangag and a fried egg and what they call longanisa, a little sweet sausage, and coffee that arrived in a small cup and hit like a fist. I ate everything. My knees hurt from the walking. I didn't care. Mick had rules for himself that he explained over Red Horse one evening on his balcony. Red Horse is San Miguel's stronger cousin. You drink it slowly, and it respects you. You drink it fast, and it doesn't. He'd been here 3 years, and he'd seen the whole range of outcomes, and he'd arrived at his rules the slow way, through observation and a couple of early mistakes he was vague about. Don't put your name on anything you can't walk away from. Don't commit money before you commit time. Meet the family before you meet the situation. I listened. I'm a good listener. Underground, you learn to hear the things that aren't being said as much as the things that are. The Sunday market was Mick's idea. Not a tourist market, a proper local one, out toward the Mandaue side, the kind of place where the stalls are selling vinegar and dried fish and plastic household goods, and nothing is priced for a foreigner, because foreigners don't generally come. Mick had a contact there, a fella who sold native vinegar he liked for his cooking. I went along because I had no other plans, and the morning was cooler than usual. The stall was run by a woman named Tessie, who was maybe 60 and very businesslike, and beside Tessie was her cousin's helper, who was not Tessie. She was 41, though I didn't know that yet. Compact, practical-looking, in a plain blue top and rubber sandals, sorting bottles of banana ketchup into a box. She looked up when we arrived and said something quick in Cebuano to Tessie, and then looked at me, not the way some people look at a Kano, which is a sort of calculation, just an ordinary look, the way you'd look at anyone who turned up at your stall on a Sunday morning. Mick did the transaction. I stood there, being warm and useless. And then she said, in very clear English, "Your hands, you worked with them?" Not a question, just an observation, like she was reading something. I said yes, underground, coal mining, 32 years. She nodded slowly and said, "Hard work," in a way that wasn't performance. No follow-up about money, no follow-up about where I was from, or how long I was staying, or whether I was married. Just hard work. And then she went back to sorting the ketchup. Her name was Gloria. I bought 3 bottles of vinegar I had absolutely no use for. White cane vinegar, the kind she said was good for adobo. I don't make adobo. I didn't even know what adobo was. But Mick gave me a look, and I bought the vinegar, and we walked on. On the way home in the grab, I said, "Who's the woman, the one helping at the stall?" Mick said, "Gloria. She works at a clinic in Mandaue. Nurse's aide. Widowed a few years back, raises her youngest brother, looks after her mother. Serious woman. Not the type you're thinking." I told him I wasn't thinking any type. He said, "Right, so," in a tone that suggested he didn't entirely believe me, but was willing to let it pass. The following Sunday, I went back. On my own this time. I told myself it was because I wanted more vinegar, which was not true, and because the market was interesting, which was partially true, and not for any other reason, which was a manageable lie to tell yourself on a Sunday morning in Cebu. Gloria was there. She saw me coming. She didn't smile exactly, but her face did something in that direction. We talked for, I don't know, 40 minutes, maybe more, standing at the side of the stall while Tessie handled the actual selling. She asked me what I'd seen of Cebu so far. I told her about the carbon market, the carinderia, the karaoke that started at 9. She laughed at the karaoke, a genuine laugh, said her neighbor was the same. I told her a bit about Castlecomer, about the mining, about what Ireland looks like in December. She listened the way people listen when they're actually interested, rather than when they're waiting for their turn to talk. I told her about Mariade. I don't know why. I hadn't planned to. I just said something about how my wife had passed. Not recently. Settling into it now, and Gloria went quiet. Not awkward quiet. The other kind. The kind that means someone understood the weight of the thing and isn't going to poke at it. I bought 2 more bottles of vinegar. I have, at this point, 5 bottles of Philippine cane vinegar in my life, and nothing to do with them. This is where it started. Before I went home at the end of that first month, Mick sat me down properly. Not on the balcony this time, at his kitchen table, which felt more serious. He had a notepad in front of him, which I found faintly alarming. He said he wasn't trying to tell me what to do. He said he was going to tell me what he'd seen in 3 years of living here, and I could do whatever I liked with it, but he'd rather say it now than be having a different conversation later. He talked for about an hour. I wrote things in my notebook while he talked, which seemed to surprise him. What he said boiled down to this: the financial expectations are real. They are not imaginary. They are not always manipulation, and they will arrive whether you're ready for them or not. A woman like Gloria, working, responsible, carrying her family, is not running a scam. But she is operating inside a set of obligations that you, as a man from Castlecomer, do not have and cannot fully understand without time. The question is not whether the expectations will come. The question is whether you've decided, before they come, what you're prepared to do about them. Don't commit money before you commit time. Meet the family before you meet the situation. Never put your name on anything you can't walk away from. 3 rules. I wrote them down. Then he said one more thing, almost as an afterthought. Go slow enough that you can see clearly. Most men go fast, because fast feels like confidence. It isn't. It's just fast. I flew back to Castlecomer in January. The house was cold. I'd left the heating on a timer, and it had cut out 2 days before I arrived, and everything smelled slightly of damp and old air. I stood in the kitchen for a while. The good china was still in the cabinet. I made tea and drank it standing up, and thought about the noise of lahug at 9 o'clock at night. I booked a return flight 6 weeks later. The second visit, I extended the stay to 5 weeks. The routine with Gloria had already established itself, without either of us planning it. Sunday market in the morning, some arrangement for the afternoon. We went to a Mang Inasal on Osmeña Boulevard one Saturday, the kind of place where the chicken comes on a stick, and the soup is free, and everyone eats with their hands, and nobody thinks anything of it. She showed me how to mix the rice with the chicken oil, which felt like being trusted with something. We talked about ordinary things, her shift patterns at the clinic, a difficult patient she'd had that week, an elderly man who kept trying to remove his IV line, my daughter Sinead's new house in Rathfarnham, the price of lumber, which had gone up in Kilkenny. It was companionable. That's the word. I was 64 years old, and what I was getting from these afternoons was company that didn't feel like charity. She wasn't performing warmth at me. She wasn't working toward something. She was just there, present, saying true things. By the end of the second visit, on the last Saturday before I was due to fly, she introduced me to her cousin Tessie properly. Not just at the market stall, but over merienda at Tessie's house in Mandaue. Small house, painted blue, a basketball ring bolted to the wall across the lane. Inside it smelled of rice and something frying, and the particular staleness of a house that doesn't have much airflow. Tessie was funny and sharp, and interrogated me politely about Ireland for 45 minutes. Did we really have that much rain? Did I know anyone famous? Was it true that Irish people were good drinkers? I said we'd a reasonable reputation for it. She seemed satisfied. Gloria watched all of this without saying much. On the way back, in a tricycle heading toward the main road, she said, and this is more or less exactly how she said it, "Tessie likes you. She doesn't like many people." I said that was good to know. She looked out at the road. "My family is complicated," she said. "I want you to know that before you meet them." I told her most families were. She said, "Mine is more than most." I didn't push. I wrote it in the notebook when I got back to the guest house, not as a warning to myself, just as a fact to hold on to. Third visit was in April, 4 months after the first. 5 weeks again. By now the WhatsApp calls between visits had become a thing. Not long, not romantic exactly, just regular. She'd send a photo of something at the market. I'd send a photo of the rain in Kilkenny, which she found disproportionately funny. She called me once from outside the clinic during a break, and I could hear traffic and someone selling something from a speaker on a passing jeepney. And she said, "How are your knees today?" And I said, "Not great." And she said, "You should be walking more, not less." And I thought, this is what it sounds like when someone is paying attention. On the second Sunday of the third visit, she brought me to the family home for the first time. Mandaue, a concrete house on a lane too narrow for cars, the walls painted yellow a long time ago, a Santo Niño in a glass case above the front door, and another one visible through the window. 6 people in 4 rooms. Gloria's mother, Nana Cora, her youngest brother Rodel, who was 19, 2 aunts who seemed to be in residence on a semi-permanent basis, and Tessie again, who nodded at me as if she'd been expecting me to turn up sooner or later. I want to be specific about this because I think it matters. The house was poor by Irish standards, by Kilkenny standards. 1 room was bedroom and sitting room together. The kitchen was a gas ring and a table. The bathroom was outside and shared with the house next door. There were photographs everywhere, on the walls, on the windowsills, and a certificate from Rodel's vocational school framed above the television, which was the largest object in the room and, obviously, important. I grew up in a terrace house in Castlecomer with 7 people and 1 bathroom. I was not in any way shocked. What I noticed was the organization of the space. Every surface clean, every object in its place. The same kind of order you learn when you don't have enough room to be careless. Nana Cora shook my hand with both of her hands and said something in Cebuano that Gloria translated as, "She says you have a good face. She says you look like someone who has known difficulty." I said, "Tell her she's not wrong." Nana Cora laughed. She had a small, complete laugh. She called me Kuya Brendan for the rest of the afternoon, which Gloria explained means roughly older brother. A respectful term, she said. A good one. I ate pancit and rice and something called kare kare that Tessie had made, which is a peanut stew and which I liked more than I expected to. and we sat in the small sitting room with the fan turning overhead and the sounds of the lane outside. Children, a dog, someone's television. And I felt, in a way I hadn't felt in nearly 2 years, that I was inside something rather than outside it. That evening I wrote in the notebook, "Family seems genuine. House is poor but dignified. Gloria embarrassed about neither." Good sign. I'm aware that sounds calculating. It probably was. But I'd rather be calculating than blind. And I'd rather be honest about being calculating than pretend I was just following my heart. My heart had gotten Mairead buried and hadn't given me much useful guidance since. The notebook was all I had. The call came on a Wednesday evening in month 5, which by that point meant I was back in Castlecomer between visits, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold, doing a crossword I hadn't the patience for. Gloria rang on WhatsApp. I could tell from the first word that something was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, but the kind of wrong where someone is choosing their words more carefully than usual. She said Rodell had had an accident with a motorbike. Not a serious accident, she said quickly. He was fine, no hospital, just some cuts and bruises. But the motorbike was destroyed. And the motorbike, it turned out, was his way of getting to his vocational placement in Lapu-Lapu City. Without it, he'd miss the placement. Miss the placement. Miss the qualification. Miss the qualification. And the past 2 years of school meant nothing. She said the family had been looking at second-hand bikes. She'd found one for $90,000, about $1,250. They had $25,000 saved between them. She said she wasn't sure why she was telling me this. She said maybe she just needed to say it to someone. I asked one question. I said, "Was it a repair or a purchase?" Long pause. Long enough that I thought the call had dropped. She said it was a purchase. She said the old bike had been in poor condition already, and the accident had finished it, and she'd been embarrassed to say that from the start because she didn't want it to seem like. And then she stopped. I said, "Like what?" She said, "Like I was asking." I sent the P65,000 shortfall that week. That's roughly $1,050, via Wise, which Mick had set me up with because he said Western Union charges were criminal, and he wasn't wrong. The money arrived in Gloria's G-Cash account within the hour, and she sent me a voice message that I still have somewhere on my phone. Short, practical, genuinely grateful, without being theatrical about it. But I wrote in my notebook that evening. I wrote, "Motorbike, P65,000, $1,250. Genuine need, confirmed." But she softened the truth at the start. Ask why. I raised it on my next call. Not confrontationally. I want to be clear about that, because confrontation isn't really my way. I just said, plainly, that I'd noticed she hadn't told me the full thing at the start of the conversation, and I was curious about that. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, because she didn't know how he would take it if she asked directly. He, meaning me. She'd been trying to find a way to tell me that didn't feel like a request. And in doing so, she'd made it worse. I told her I didn't mind being asked. What I couldn't work with was half the story, because half a story looks like the whole story until it isn't. And then you feel like a fool. I said this as mildly as I could manage, which is how I say most things. She said she understood. She said, in her experience, men didn't like to feel they were being asked for money. I said that was probably true, but I'd rather feel asked than feel managed. Another pause. Then she said, "Okay, I'll try." And here's the thing. She did. It wasn't perfect. She still softened things around the edges sometimes, still approached certain subjects sideways rather than straight on. But she never again presented me with a half-truth and called it the full one. I think that conversation, awkward and careful as it was, established something between us. A kind of working agreement about honesty. It's not nothing. I want to say something here, because I think it's important, and I don't hear it said enough. Gloria was not a dishonest person. She was a person who had learned, over 41 years, of asking things of people who had very little to give, to make her requests as small and unthreatening as possible. That's not manipulation, that's adaptation. That's what you do when you've spent your life not having enough and not wanting to be a burden. I recognized it, actually. My mother had done the same thing, in a different context, in Castlecomer, 40 years ago. Understanding why someone does something doesn't mean the thing is fine. The half-truth still needed to be named. But understanding it meant I wasn't angry. And not being angry meant we could actually sort it out rather than bury it. The fourth visit, I went back in September. 6 weeks this time. I'd settled into a pattern, a service department in La Hug, that Mick had found me, $28,000 a month, about $450, which was more comfortable than the guest house and had a proper kitchen, which mattered for the knees because I couldn't always walk far in the heat. I was spending roughly $2,500 per visit all in. Flights, accommodation, food, the bits and pieces. Manageable. Within my pension income with room to spare. By this visit I'd been introduced to most of the extended family in one way or another. There was Tessie, who I already knew. There were the two aunts, Auntie Beth and Auntie Nana, who viewed me with varying degrees of suspicion and approval depending on what week it was. There was a cousin named June, who sold mobile phone accessories at the Ayala Center Cebu and spoke very fast English, full of expressions he'd learned from American YouTube videos. And there was Rodell. I liked Rodell. He was 19, quiet in the way young men are quiet when they're thinking more than they're saying, and he had the motorbike now, a second-hand Honda, decent condition. And he rode it to his placement every morning and came back in the evenings and sometimes sat with me on the plastic chairs outside the house when Gloria was still at the clinic, and we'd watch the lane and not say very much, which was the kind of company I understood. One evening he asked me what coal mining was like. I told him. He listened carefully and then said, "Underground, all the time. Were you afraid?" I said, "You learn not to be. You learn that fear underground takes energy you need for other things, so you put it somewhere else and get on with the job." He nodded slowly. He said, "I think about that. When I am nervous about something, put it somewhere else." 19 years old. Not a bad thing to be working out at 19. I wrote that one down too. The cataract situation arrived 7 months in, and I want to tell you how it arrived because the how of it matters. It wasn't a phone call with a number attached. It wasn't Gloria saying, "Brendan, I need money." It was a Sunday afternoon in Cebu, month 7 of the whole thing, sitting in the small sitting room in Mandaue with the fan turning and Nanay Cora across from me, and Gloria translating a conversation that had clearly been going on in the family for some time before I turned up. Cora's vision had been going for 2 years. Cataracts in both eyes. The left one bad, the right one catching up. She could still see shapes and light, but reading was gone. Faces, at any distance, were gone. And she'd stopped going to Mass because she couldn't see where she was putting her feet on the uneven pavement outside. That last part seemed to pain her more than anything. She told me this matter-of-factly. The way someone tells you about a leaking roof. Here is the problem. Here is what it has cost us. Here is what we haven't been able to fix. The surgery cost $100,000 total for both eyes at a private clinic in Mandaue, about $1,600. The public hospital could do it for less, but the waiting list was 6 months minimum, and the ophthalmologist at the clinic had told Gloria that Cora's right eye might not last 6 months without real deterioration. The family had saved $20,000 toward it. They weren't asking me to cover the rest. They were explaining the situation, which in this family, I had come to understand, was not a different thing. I want to stop here and tell you what I did, because this is the part of the story where men tend to either panic or capitulate, and I didn't do either. I went back to the guest house that evening, and I sat at the small table by the window, and I opened the notebook, and I wrote down everything. The amount needed, $80,000 shortfall, roughly $1,280. My current savings position, I'd started the year with $95,000, spent approximately $7,200 across 7 months of visits, the motorbike contribution, and miscellaneous costs. So I had roughly $87,800 left. The P80,000 represented less than 1.5% of what I had. Then I wrote a second column. Not numbers, questions. Is this real? Yes. I'd seen Cora struggle to find her chair in her own sitting room. Can I verify the cost? Yes. I asked Gloria to send me the clinic's written estimate, which she did the next morning. No hesitation. Is this the beginning of something that doesn't end? That one I couldn't answer yet. I wrote it down and left it there. I said yes, but I said it with a condition attached, and the condition was that I would come to the clinic. Not to supervise, not to check that the surgery actually happened, but because if I was contributing to something that mattered to this family, I wanted to be part of it, rather than a figure on a bank transfer. That's how I would have done it in Kilkenny. You show up. That's what showing up means. Gloria went quiet when I said that. I think she'd expected either the money with no questions or the money with suspicion, and she didn't quite know what to do with someone who just wanted to be in the room. The surgery was on a Thursday morning. I sat in a corridor in the clinic on a plastic chair next to Rodell, who had taken the morning off his placement, and we shared a bag of those little bread rolls you get in the 7-Eleven near the Ayala, and didn't say very much. The clinic smelled of disinfectant and something floral, air freshener probably, and outside I could hear a jeepney idling and someone calling something in Cebuano from the street. Cora came out of the procedure with both eyes patched, moving carefully, and Gloria had her arm. She found my hand without being able to see it, felt along the chair, found my wrist, held on. She said something I didn't understand. Gloria said, "She says, thank you. She says God sent you." I said, "Tell her she's welcome. I'm not a particularly religious man. I go to Mass because it's somewhere to be." But I thought about that phrase for a while afterward. God sent you. And I thought about the particular Catholic quality of it. This idea that things arrive for reasons, that the pattern of events has a purpose you might not understand in the moment, but that exists nonetheless. I'm not sure I believe that, but I understand why it's comforting. And I understood that for Cora, in that corridor, it was not a figure of speech. She meant it, and that meant something to me, in a way I couldn't quite account for. Now, I want to tell you something that sounds like it contradicts everything I've just said, but it doesn't. By month 10, I had settled into a pattern. 6 weeks in Cebu, roughly 8 weeks back in Castlecomer, repeat. I was spending about $2,800 per visit, including flights and accommodation and the day-to-day. Over 10 months, I'd contributed roughly $9,500 in total. The visits, the motorbike, the surgery. I had about $85,500 left in savings. My pension covered my living costs in Castlecomer, with a few €100 to spare each month. The maths worked. But on a Tuesday morning in November, coming back from a walk along the seafront at Mactan, my knees were bad that day, the humidity sitting on them like a weight. I sat on a wall and looked at the water, and started doing a different kind of calculation. Not money. Something harder to measure. I was 64 years old, mild lung scarring, 2 knee replacements probably in the next 5 years, the consultant in Kilkenny had said. My children were in Dublin and Boston. My GP was in Kilkenny. If something happened to me here, not dramatically, just the ordinary something that happens to men of a certain age with certain histories, the nearest hospital I actually trusted to manage my specific conditions was 12 hours of travel away. Maryad had been sick for 3 years. I had watched it. I knew what it looked like when things went wrong slowly. I knew what it cost to be far from the people and places that could help. I sat on that wall for a long time. The sea was very flat. A banca boat went past, unhurried. Someone was selling something from a cart along the road, calling out in a rhythm I couldn't parse. I wrote one line in the notebook that evening. Can I actually live here? Not. Should I? Can I? The body has its own arithmetic, and I'd spent 32 years learning to respect it. I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew, sitting on that wall, that I was going to have to find one, and that finding it would require a conversation I hadn't had yet, the most honest one, and the hardest one, with Gloria. I didn't plan the conversation. That's the honest truth of it. I'd been thinking about what to say for 3 weeks, turning it over on the flights, on the walks, lying awake in the apartment in La Hague with the ceiling fan doing its slow work above me. And in the end it happened on a Tuesday evening on plastic chairs outside Tessie's house, in the lane too narrow for cars, with the smell of someone's dinner coming from next door, and a basketball bouncing somewhere further up the street. Gloria had finished a late shift at the clinic. She still had her lanyard on. She was eating a piece of pain de sal from a bag she'd bought at the bakery near the jeepney stop, and she offered me one, and I said no. And then I said, I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure how to say it, so I'm just going to say it plainly. She put the bread down. That's how she is. She gives you her whole attention when something serious is coming. No fussing, no preempting. She just waits. I said, I can't stay here permanently. My health, my children, the house in Castlecomer. I'm an Irish man, and I think I need to stay an Irish man, at least part of the time. And I can't ask you to come to Ireland permanently either, because your mother is here, and Rodell is here, and the clinic is here, and transplanting you from all of that to County Kilkenny in February would be, I don't know. It would be wrong. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, So what are you saying? I said I didn't know exactly. That's the truth. I wasn't ending things. I wasn't proposing anything grand. I was trying to be honest before we'd gone far enough that honesty would cost one of us everything. She cried. I want to say that directly because I think it matters. She didn't argue. She didn't perform anything. She just cried, quietly, turned slightly away from me, one hand over her mouth. The basketball kept bouncing somewhere up the lane. I held her other hand, and I waited. The way I know how to wait. And I didn't say anything because there was nothing useful to say, and I'd learned by then that she didn't need me to fill the silence. After a while she said, I knew this was coming. She said she'd been thinking about it too, for weeks, but she hadn't known how to raise it, because she didn't want to be the one to say it first, in case I took it as a sign that she wanted to end things. And I hadn't wanted to say it first in case she took it as me not caring enough to find a way. So we'd both been sitting with it, circling it, and here we were. That made me want to laugh a bit. Not unkindly. Just, we're a right pair, the two of us. The actual negotiation took 3 evenings. I say negotiation. It wasn't adversarial. It was more like 2 people trying to draw a map of a place neither of them had been before, comparing notes, correcting each other when the lines didn't match up. What we arrived at? 6 months in Cebu, which is where the better part of the year is. October through March, when the heat is manageable and the rains have eased. 3 months in Castlecomer, which is when I need to be near my GP and my daughter, and the particular comfort of knowing every pothole on the road to the town. The remaining 3 months, uncertain, flexible, to be decided as we go. It suited neither of us perfectly. That's how you know it's honest. And now I want to say the thing that the video title is actually asking about, because I've been coming to it the whole time, and I think you deserve a straight answer. The difference between a Filipina girlfriend and a Western girlfriend. Is there one? Yes. Is it what most people think? No. Here's what it isn't. It isn't that Filipino women are more devoted, more loyal, more loving, more grateful. Some are, some aren't. The same is true everywhere. Anyone telling you different is selling something. Here's what it actually is, in my experience, for whatever that's worth. With Mariad, every obligation between us was invisible. We'd built a life together over 38 years, and the obligations were embedded in it so deeply that neither of us could have named them on request. Who does the shopping? Who handles the money? Who rings the children when there's something to be said? It was all there. It was all real. And it was all unspeakable. Not because we were hiding it, but because it had become the furniture. You don't think about the furniture until it's gone. With Gloria, every obligation is visible. It's spoken. The family she supports, the brother she's raising, the mother she takes to Mass. And my position in relation to all of it? That's spoken too, once we'd learned how to speak to each other. What I contribute and what I don't. What I'm prepared to do and what I'm not. It's all on the table. Some men find that transactional. I find it honest. I spent 32 years in a job where unclear communication got people killed. And I've never trusted invisible arrangements. At least with Gloria, I know where I stand. At least when she asks me something, she asks me. And at least when I say yes or no, we both know what I've said. That's not a cultural hierarchy. That's just two different systems for managing the same human realities. Both have costs. Both have things to recommend them. The question isn't which one is better. The question is which one you understand well enough to navigate without destroying yourself or someone else. I still have 5 bottles of cane vinegar in my kitchen in Castlecomer. I've used 2 of them. I learned to make adobo over the winter. Badly at first, better now. Sinead came for Sunday dinner in February and had 2 helpings without knowing what it was. And I told her afterward, and she looked at me for a long moment and said, "You seem different, Dad." I said I thought I probably was. She said, "Is that good?" I said I thought it probably was as well. So, where does that leave me? 65 years old, Irish, bad knees, mild lung scarring, a pension that covers my costs with enough left over to be comfortable without being foolish. I've spent roughly $9,000 over 18 months that I wouldn't have spent sitting in Castlecomer staring at the good china. I have about $86,000 remaining. I am not ruined. I am not a cautionary tale. I am also not fixed, which I think is the more honest way to put it. I go back to Cebu in October. 6 weeks, maybe 7 if the knees are behaving. I'll stay in the apartment in La Hug. The same one the landlord has become used to me at this point. Leaves the key under a particular flower pot because I always arrive at an odd hour. Gloria will be at work when I land, and I'll let myself in and put the kettle on. And she'll come by in the evening after her shift, still with the lanyard on, and we'll sit on the small balcony and watch the lights of the neighborhood come on one by one in the dusk, and the karaoke will start at 9, and that will be that for another season. It's not a fairy tale. I want to be clear about that. There are things that remain unresolved and probably will remain unresolved. The question of what happens if my health deteriorates seriously while I'm here, I've thought about that, and the honest answer is that I'd need to get home, and the logistics of that are complicated enough that I've started keeping a small emergency fund of about $3,000 in a separate account specifically for that eventuality. The question of what Gloria and I actually are to each other in any legal or formal sense, we haven't answered that, and I don't think we will for some time, partly because in the Philippines formal marriage carries implications that neither of us is ready to navigate. There's no divorce here, none. If things went wrong between us, and we'd married, untangling that would cost hundreds of thousands of pesos and years of legal process that I haven't the stomach for. So we stay as we are, defined by what we do rather than what a document says. That suits me well enough. Rodel finished his vocational qualification in August. He's working now, installing air conditioning units in commercial buildings in Mandaue. He earns $18,000 a month, about $290, which is not a lot, but it's his, and he seems proud of it in a way that's quiet and real. He came to find me on his first payday and handed me an envelope with $5,000 in it, about $80, and said it was to start paying back the motorbike. I told him he didn't owe me anything. He said, very politely, that he wanted to. We went back and forth about it in the way you do when two stubborn people are trying to be generous to each other, and in the end, I took P2,000 and told him to keep the rest for himself, and he accepted that with a small nod that had a great deal of dignity in it for a 19-year-old. I think about him a lot, actually. Put it somewhere else, he'd said, when I'd told him about managing fear underground. He was applying that to his own nervousness about starting work, about being competent, about the ordinary terrors of being young in a world that doesn't wait for you to feel ready. I hope it serves him. Now, since this is the part of the video where someone in my position is supposed to say something useful, something you can actually take away, let me try to be direct about what I've learned. The first thing is this. Most men who come to the Philippines, or to Thailand, or to Vietnam, are running towards something they don't have a name for, and away from something they haven't fully acknowledged. I was running away from a house that smelled of damp and a kitchen table I sat at alone. That's not a good foundation for any decision, let alone one involving another person's life and your own savings. Know what you're actually doing before you do it. Or at minimum, be honest with yourself that you don't know, and proceed carefully because of it. The second thing, the financial expectations are real, and they are not automatically manipulation. Gloria's family needed a motorbike and a cataract surgery. Those things were real. What made the difference between those being reasonable contributions to a genuine relationship and being the first step toward losing everything was not the amounts. It was whether I understood what I was agreeing to and made the decision with my eyes open rather than my heart closed. Understand the culture before you judge the ask. They are not the same as us in this regard, and neither is better. The third thing, the notebook. Carry one. Not to track debts or build a case against someone. To track your own thinking. To write down what you've noticed and what questions you haven't asked yet, and what you told yourself in the moment, and whether it still makes sense 3 weeks later. Men in my situation tend to trust feeling over evidence, because feeling is what they came for. The notebook is just a way of making sure the two stay honest with each other. And the last thing, the most important thing, maybe, underground, when something goes wrong, a support shifts, a sound changes, the air moves in a way it shouldn't. The most dangerous thing you can do is panic, and the second most dangerous thing is pretend you didn't notice. Both of them get people killed. The right response is to stop, read the situation clearly, and move carefully in the direction that gives you the most options. That's all I did in the Philippines. I stopped. I read it carefully. I moved in the direction that kept the most options open. I know that sounds less romantic than the other version of this story, the one where a widowed man finds unexpected love on the other side of the world, and everything slots into place like it was always meant to. That version exists too, I'm sure. But it wasn't my version, and I'm not convinced it's most people's version. Most people's version is messier and more negotiated and less symmetrical than that. Most people's version is a Tuesday evening on plastic chairs in a lane too narrow for cars, saying the true thing before it costs too much to say it, and then waiting to see what comes back. What came back, for me, was worth the wait. Right. That's enough from me. And that's where we'll leave Brendan. That's inside the Philippines, not a promise of paradise and not a catalogue of disasters, but something closer to the truth of what actually happens when ordinary people make extraordinary decisions and try, with varying degrees of success, to keep their eyes open while they make them. If you're watching this because you're considering coming to the Philippines, or you're already here and you're navigating some of what Brendan described, the financial expectations, the family obligations, the question of what you're actually doing and why, then the comment section is below, and the people who watch this channel have seen most of it. You're not alone in this, and you're not the first. If Brendan's story is yours to tell, you know where to find us. This is Inside the Philippines. Take care of yourselves.